Hey guys, it's Shon. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Hello everybody, welcome to Not So Average with Shon Wilson. I am your host, Shon Wilson. If this is your first time with the podcast, welcome. If you and I already have history, welcome back. I am super excited, as you can probably tell by all of the energy beaming off of me, because today we are continuing our conversation around life path and destiny with a very special guest. Today's episode is part of a 3-episode series that I am doing where I interview some women who have unique and very, special insight into what it means to discover or follow one's life path or destiny. Today's guest is Jenny Florence of Moon Magic Weekly Tarot. My other 2 sit-downs were with Alyssa LaRose of Celtic Fairy Tarot and Odessa Mall, Mystic Intuitive Healer. Trust me, you're going to want to check out all 3. I know you're going to love this conversation. Hi, Jenny. How are you today?
I am really, really good, Shon. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is amazing to be here.
You have no idea what a treat it is for me that you said yes and to be sitting in front of you right now. I feel like I know you because I watch so much of your content. For those of you who don't know, in addition to having my tarot channel, I also watch a lot of tarot videos. And Jenny's channel is one of my go-tos every single week. That is one of the reasons why I invited you to be a part of our conversation for this series. We're talking about life path and destiny. And I know that some of the readings that you provide on YouTube are destiny readings or life purpose readings. So I thought, it makes the most sense to have people who are thinking on those terms, operating in that space, probably getting a lot of feedback from your viewers around it, to give us some of your insights about, what do these terms mean? Sometimes, I know I do. I'm very, very guilty of using them interchangeably.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts around that? Do you think of life path and destiny and life purpose and dharma as all the same thing, or do you see them as different things?
Well, it's really, really interesting. I mean, it might be really useful as well, just to kind of let your viewers know. In my background, although I have read tarot cards all my life, I mean, since I was really, really tiny, I think I got my first set of cards when I was about 10.
Oh, wow.
Really, really young. And so I've always had this kind of like real connection to things like this. But I mean, my mainstream career, I worked as a full-time accredited psychotherapist for, a long, long time. And so in a way, I think that's really influenced the way that I read cards and the kind of underlying messages and the kind of content. So I'm really, really interested in kind of how we get ourselves into a bit of a pickle sometimes when we get ourselves stuck. Right. But I'm also really, really interested in then how we get ourselves unstuck.
Right.
And, if we're struggling with anything, what's the purpose to it? What's the bigger picture? Maybe there is a life lesson, because 9 times out of 10, in fact, probably 99.999 times out of 100, there is a bigger picture. There's a lesson to be learned. And that's that's like a level of soul growth. And I think, I do consider all kind of therapeutic work. I kind of think we're gardeners of the soul, really. And I think readers are the same. When you tune into a tarot reading, you're tuning in because you're looking for you yourself have a purpose. Even if you're just looking for some weekly guidance, or you need to touch base, or you're having a real wobble and you're looking for some support or some help or an anchor point, maybe just to kind of feel like the world isn't going completely crazy. Or, there's, and as I said, even if it is just a weekly touch base, with some of my readings, they literally are a weekly reading that is there to connect in what's happening in the next 7 days is their guidance. And curiously enough, I think this does have a reference point to things like our calling, our destiny, our purpose. And I think you're really right. We use these, we kind of interchange
all the time.
Absolutely. And I find myself thinking, it's easy to make an assumption that people know exactly what we mean when we use that language. In a way, if I think about my own journey and my own working world and the therapeutic aspects of all of our personal growth,
right,
I think on some level we're always on some kind of a pathway of learning, of a calling, of a purpose. I almost see it, it's a bit like if you were standing in front of like a cliff, for example, that, you know, on a beach, and you can see the layers like of the rock.
Yes.
And you know, there are these different ages and stages of development in front of you. And in many ways, I sort of feel like we have these multi-layers going on in our lives all of the time. And some of them we are conscious of. Some of them it's like, I really want to do that. That's where I want to go. That's my goal, my purpose. I feel that's my calling or my destiny.
Yes.
Right below that, there could be a whole other layer of soul growth that we're not even completely conscious of. And yet that may be on a spiritual level. Even if you're not aware of it, that could be actually your current calling and purpose might be to overcome some element of growth, or to step through a challenge, to strengthen an aspect of your personality, or, I don't know, move beyond something, some limiting belief or some structure, you know, that you grew into when you were little that no longer serves you.
Absolutely.
So I sort of see it as being kind of pretty multi-led. I don't know, I'm slightly digressing, but, you know.
No, I love everything that you're saying, because one of the things that I think is going to end up being very helpful for people who heard that answer, and it definitely immediately for me made me go, oh yeah, is that it kind of takes away this idea of, and the pressure around having to figure out what your purpose is. I think one of the reasons why a lot of people are confounded by this, well, the first thing, and I say this a lot, at least with this season of the podcast, because I'm talking about this in particular, I say it a lot, it's that it's not defined for us. This is not something that gets taught in school. Most people don't even get it taught in their homes. So we don't have any kind of definition for the most part around what they mean. But the other thing that I think hangs people up is an idea of, I don't know what my life purpose is, feeling I need to go figure it out, and not even beginning to know how to do that, where to go to do that, anything. And from the answer you just gave, it feels very much to me, and I totally sign on for this idea, the answers are inside of you. And if we're paying attention, and it's so funny, you mentioned specifically, you mentioned standing on the cliffs on the beach. And as I'm talking to you now, and I'm thinking about the fact that touching base with the self, being in touch with the self, spending time with the self alone is a great way to start having that come up, unfold, reveal. And immediately I think of the Hermit card in tarot. Immediately I think of, because in many of my decks, the depiction of the Hermit card is he's on a cliff, right?
Yes.
So it sounds to you that, it sounds to me, sorry, that you're saying it's quite possible that we have the answers, but just don't know it. And that they also, there might be many answers.
Yeah, I think it's multi-layered. It's quite interesting, as you just talked about the imagery of the hermit. And it also immediately put me in touch with the imagery of the Fool card, which is also often
on a cliff.
Depicted on a cliff. Somebody about to launch themselves, you know, into a new phase of the world, somewhere that feels unknown, out of their comfort zone. And curiously enough, as you were kind of talking, though, if we think of those two images as the hermit being sometimes our own inner guide, sometimes a guide that can show up. I mean, perhaps that's more of a Hierophant kind of energy, but the point is it's navigating our way through something from a space of internal reflection.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, though, becoming aware of, I think, our relationship with the world around us. And I'm very, very big on teaching people to listen to themselves.
Yeah, me too.
Also to listen to life as it flows through us. You know, we're in a relationship with all of life all of the time. You know, we know now that, I mean, I love the fact that science and spirituality are coming together.
Yes.
Isn't it magic?
Yes.
You know, so, you know, I mean, wisdom traditions have known forever that we are all one and the same. And it's like Carl Sagan says, you know, we're made of star stuff. I mean, I like that.
Right.
And so we're all made of the same stuff. We're all energy, interacting and exchanging all of the time. You know, if we move into the territory of indigenous peoples who have, I think, retained that level of knowledge and that level of awareness that everything around us is alive. If we can slow down enough to listen, pause and sit with a tree, sit with a rock, and kind of see, if you then go into that inner space, that hermit space within you, listen and hear what is being communicated to you. And native peoples understand rocks, the rock nation, as being the memory keepers. They have been here since the earth began. Yeah. And so, if you meditate with a rock, many people will meditate with a tree and see what comes through to them. And it's kind of like keeping all channels of communication open and recognizing that we are in relationship with all of life. We're not just in relationship with the rest of humanity. And I do think, one of the challenges that we face around this idea of destiny and calling is that it becomes very human-centric.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, ma'am. I was just going to ask, would you say then that one of the steps, someone who's trying to decipher, figure out, decide, because I tend to think it's a decision more so than waiting to hear what something or someone outside of you says.
Yeah.
That's my personal belief. That one good step towards that would be spending more time in nature. So not just spending the time internally with the self, but also maybe some answers will come from that rock, from that tree, from that beautiful bird song that you have, from just being in that space. Because as you put it, we are connected to all of that and not just connected to each other, human to human to human.
Do you know, I kind of find myself wanting to take it even a step further into the territory of, I would call it let's say the masculine perspective and the feminine perspective. And I don't voice this in terms of gender. If we think of this as being that we each contain the masculine energy and a feminine energy, and we need both. Right. And if we think of the mind as being a more masculine area of our life, and perhaps the more emotional side of things being the more feminine element, when we use both in harmony, we're really tapping into a balance of communication. Right. So, we know that if we make choices and decisions, those choices and decisions are being organized by our mind, and our capacity to be really focused and goal-orientated even is orientated through the masculine, which is fabulous because we need that. Right. But actually, maybe there's a need to nurture something along a little bit as well, where we take time out, we go for a walk, we relax, we slow things down. It's like the difference between maybe taking a straight road and a windy road. Okay. And there's a time and a place for both. For both, yes. And actually, if we can learn to be intuitive enough to ourselves and the world around us and everything that is alive and in full communication all of the time, then in a way, the answers are kind of shown to us, and we can begin to live life in a more both intuitive and action orientated way. It's like a mixture of both, because I can't help feeling Western culture tends to be quite mind dominated. Absolutely. Tends to be quite masculine dominated. Yeah. It doesn't, we don't stop and smell the roses enough. We don't stop and listen enough in a different way, and I think if we can address that balance and the earth itself, and I mean, everything is calling for us to bring that balance into being, then we begin to value exactly that, the choices that we have, the conscious free will choices that we ourselves can make, but also, I don't know, maybe the awareness that maybe the universe has the upper hand, or that we're given sometimes we get what we need rather than what we want. Which means that there's perhaps a lesson in there for us to learn. Right. So it doesn't mean that we weren't on track, but maybe we needed another ingredient before we could kind of really complete that journey to the best of our ability. And someone throws you a curveball and you think, where did that come from? What's that about? Right. But maybe that's also part of the destiny. Perhaps that's part of being given the elements that you're going to need so that you can step up into that life purpose, that calling, to the very, very best of your ability. It's like you're being given an extra tool. It's just that it might come in a kind of a sideways way or an unexpected way.
Right.
You know, we don't always get everything in a straightforward manner, but it's often the more challenging things, I think, that bring us our greatest areas of growth, really.
Absolutely. So would you say that for you, first of all, it sounds like with your having received your first pack of tarot cards at age 10, that connection to your spiritual side or an awareness of spirituality as an active part of life has been prevalent for the majority of your life. There are some people who think when we talk about things like life path or destiny, that it has to be connected to the spiritual. And for some people, there's a lot of resistance there because they don't have that same foundation or comfort level with things of the spirit. For many of us, particularly, I can say in America, there's this tying of spirituality and religion for many people comes with all kinds of stuff that is hard, mean, unwanted, unforgiving, for lack of a better word. And so then when the concept or idea of finding or living one's purpose, destiny, or path comes up, they go, I don't want that. There comes a piece of, I don't want that, because it feels like it means having to sign on for something that may not be what you really want to do, or may really enjoy, or may really find alignment with. For people like that, because I feel like there's probably more people like that, which may also lend to why fewer people feel like they find it. Then there are people who have been situated in a place of awareness around the integration of spirituality with practical life. How, like, are there any advices or thoughts around that, or comforts, or anything that you would share with someone who's got that kind of a dichotomous thought around it?
Okay, there's a lot in what you're saying. So I think what I'm going to do is try and pull out some different little points that I think would be, because that what you've said, I think, is really valuable for people. So I mean, in a moment, I will kind of take you to an early experience of mine, which I think really set my pathway to having a different level of awareness, but it's not, that's going to be my experience and not everybody's.
Sure, absolutely.
But I think when we get into the territory of association, where we feel like spirituality becomes tangled with something that feels like either an indoctrination or something where like it's full of shoulds and shouldn'ts and coulds and couldn'ts and can'ts and ought to's and you know, that kind of stuff, lots of restrictions. It takes me back to what we were just saying about, or you know, learning to listen to ourselves in a much purer way. Right. Because if somebody's structure doesn't feel right for you, then it's not right for you. You know, I'm just going to make that really clear in my own, that's my own perspective and my own opinion. If it does not feel right for you, then it isn't right for you. Yeah. You know, it doesn't mean that there won't be another collective group of people or another belief system, or even that you need to find or connect ultimately to whatever is meaningful for you. Right. I mean, to my mind, a real purity of connection to any form of, you could call it faith, you know, faith, trust, hope, those things, which are all part of ultimately of a connectedness, a bigger picture, let's say. You know, whether that comes through an organized religion or it comes through your own primary experiences, it needs to feel right for you. You know, if it doesn't, and it's somebody else's imposition, it's like you're kind of being a round peg trying to fit into a square hole. Right. Well, that should be enough to know that that is not your calling or your purpose or your destiny. Right. You know, that's like trying to squeeze into the wrong size dress, isn't it? You know,
there is not going to work. And I can relate to that. So, you know, what you just said is, it comes from, I feel, having a sense of self-worth, because some people don't even have the idea of letting what feels right for them be the compass or the barometer of anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
yeah. And so again, it just feels, and I may be completely wrong. I'm meeting you for the first time today, but it feels like foundationally, or maybe you were just lucky and born this way, you've had a sense of space, being able to take up space in the world. And
Actually, quite the opposite, which is really interesting. So I think it will be a really good way. I mean, perhaps the other aspect I was going to say was to tell you about, perhaps some life orientating experiences of mine.
Please, absolutely.
And I think it's valuable. So, what's really interesting is, I had a near-death experience when I was very, very tiny, which I visibly still can remember. The light stream, lots of people who've had near-death experiences have experienced that light. So I clearly have some kind of a memory of that. And when you talk about being able to take up space, curiously enough, in my world, I didn't grow up in a particularly kind world. There was a lot of targeting, a lot of bullying, a lot of mental health issues within my family, still are actually in my primary family. And I think curiously enough, I think a combination of events meant that I was actually quite a withdrawn child. I never spoke. I was criticized for being too shy. And I kind of developed a world that was actually very singular and quite isolated. Yeah. But nevertheless, it was because I didn't necessarily feel comfortable. Again, really interesting. The one thing I think I did have was some sort of connection to some part of me that knew that something that didn't feel right probably wasn't right, even if I couldn't do anything about it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that my defense to cope with that, because I think we develop a defense is simply a management strategy.
Right. A coping skill. Absolutely.
It's a coping skill. And whatever that is, my coping skill was actually to become quite withdrawn and to not talk to people. And in a strange way, it meant that my own world and my connectedness to certain things remained although very privately alive, it remained very alive. And curiously enough, it didn't kind of get tarnished by other people's perspectives because I never shared those things with anyone. You kept it to yourself. You kept it precious. Because, and in some ways, from a child's perspective, it never occurred to me that people didn't all see or hear or recognize the same things that I saw. That comes much later when you begin to talk to other people and they kind of look at you like you're completely crazy. And you think, well, actually, but I've always seen that, I've always noticed that. And so, and I don't consider myself to be massively, gifted in that kind of psychic way. In all honesty, I have mentors in my own world now who I think are extraordinary people. And, my little bit of a gift is if that's, on a scale of 1 to 100, if mine is 5, theirs would be 2000, So I consider myself very gifted to have people around me now in my later life who are real guiding lights for me. But it's taken a very long time for me to be in a space where I would even trust people enough to share of myself. So but in a strange way, that isolation sort of served a purpose. Because it meant that my perspectives remained intact. They were pure. It wasn't like someone said, oh, no, that's not real, and that kind of, because a lot of people, they become numb to the reality of what is around them, and they become numb to their own real experience. And I mean, this actually results in, elements of depression actually in life, because we feel so disconnected, from life itself and from ourselves, and as you quite rightly say, we have very low self-esteem. And I've done countless workshops on, confidence and self-esteem. They're very different qualities that people lump them together, but they're not the same.
I say that in almost every episode, whenever I talk about anything where I know self-worth is important or at play or at risk, I always say, and y'all can tell her, self-worth and self-esteem are not the same thing. And again, these are two terms that people use.
Yeah, people lump things together, don't they? And it's this, and confidence. I mean, you think of the number of kind of amazingly famous people who get up on stage and the confidence they have is incredible, but they will walk off that stage and they will tear themselves to pieces.
Trust me, I know.
You
Trust
know,
me, I
they,
know. Yeah.
absolutely. You know, so I mean, yeah, we absolutely know that these things are really interesting, aren't they? But I think it is going back to people who feel they have a disconnect.
Yeah.
You know, I really cannot encourage people enough to learn to listen to themselves.
Yeah.
And even if you don't feel you can at this point in your life, trust what you actually feel. You can develop that awareness.
Yes.
Again, obviously, you know me through my tarot readings, but I mean, I have a whole online library. It's a completely free resource that people can access. Out of the books that I have written, one of the first books I wrote was called 7 Steps to Spiritual Empathy. That book will teach you to listen to yourself. That book will. It's literally the book was designed to be read in like 7 days with an exercise every day to learn to listen to yourself. And through listening to yourself, you can then begin to connect to life really as well. And then the follow-on book from that, which was Mindfulness Meets Emotional Awareness, I mean, was really about helping people understand that the more challenging emotions as a source of empowerment and not, you know, we perceive emotions as black and white, positive, negative. They're a part of your listening system.
Yes.
They're a part of your guidance system.
Yes.
If you have a conversation with someone and you walk away and you feel really angry, well, you know, hey, listen to that, because something is going on in that conversation that's really niggled you. This is important. This is a piece of really valuable information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, first of all, I want to thank you. Before I forget, I want to thank you for being generous enough to share some of your history, your personal.
Welcome.
It's more than just a path. It was literally your life experience. I want to thank you because it takes a lot of bravery to share that with anybody, but also because of the fact that a lot of times when we are watching people's content or we're seeing someone interviewed, and, you know, we are seeing oftentimes the best version of themselves. They seem to be centered. They seem to have it together. And when something is said, it can be very easy as an audience member to go, well, yeah, obviously your parents loved you, or whatever the thing is, whatever throwaway line we can use to dismiss the wisdoms that are coming our way. So because you shared that, I feel it will be heard, the point that was used to illuminate will be taken even more deeply inside, received even more greatly by people, because you speak to the fact that there was growth, there was change. You did not come out of the womb having everything together or having everything handed to you or having it easy. Now, Jenny, I do want to ask in regards to, you know, and you've talked about this twice now, your history as a, do you say counselor or therapist? Which were you?
Well, I guess ultimately, in the UK, it's kind of both really, a psychotherapist and a counselling psychotherapist. I kind of probably sit what we might see as somewhere in the middle if you look at those two trainings. But I mean, I worked for 28 years and did endless ongoing training throughout that time in a very, very big full-on practice. So I mean, I've worked from the psychiatric end of the scale, literally with people who are, you know, in a really desperate place, and right up to sort of working in business with people who are just wanting to orientate around greater people dynamics. So I have a very varied, I mean, it's been a really interesting experience, interesting world to be working with.
I, as one of your audience members or one of your viewers, I guess they're called on YouTube, I've heard you mention this multiple times. I've also heard you multiple times reference your free library. You guys, she's got a free library, and you know that I'm going to put in the description box of this video all of the ways you can have access to Jenny and her content. Which again is very generous of you to have not just created these things, but to make them accessible to people for free. I'm curious, however, about the shift from your practice as a psychotherapist, which I'm assuming was also your main means for making money during the time you were doing that, to what you're doing now. Did you do full stop retirement and then move on, or did you have some sort of a shift?
This is really interesting. Again, now this is fascinating, because if we think about, you know, what we started talking about, whether You know, do we listen to life, and do we listen to what feels right? Do we take action, or do we have to wait sometimes and we take action because kind of the world delivers us a curveball, and then we feel like we're almost like pushed into a corner and we have to do something. Right. Now, I had always yearned to write and do more things, which is really interesting. The libraries came about because I found I was never a silent counselor. There's a method of working where people sit in silence. It's like being a blank screen. I am a great believer in sharing information. You know, knowledge is power. Right. Let's put it out there. Why would I sit here and take your money and you can come and see me for 5 years when I can give you a piece of information that might just help you right now?
Unlock it. Yes.
Unlock it. And I found that increasingly I was giving a lot of information to people, and my clients were coming back and saying to me, God, I wish I had recorded that because, you know, or could you record that bit of information? And so I started recording it, initially things for them. And then they were saying, can I share it with somebody? So that's kind of how the library started, just that it could be a source of information that might be of help to anyone that might need it.
Yes.
But in my personal world, I've always yearned to write for a long, long time. The tarot cards are something that has just been a part of my personal life for a very long time. And I've read cards for friends and people that I'm close to for a long time. Several things kind of happened in my world. Firstly, I lost 7 people in 1 year.
Are you kidding?
Which was just huge. Absolutely huge. I remember
it's unheard of. Was there some sort of a natural disaster? And
it was lots of different people. It started with my dad was the first to pass away, which we expected at some point. But then I had a whole series of people, and literally I got to the end of the year and I was talking to a friend in a dance class, and I very flippantly, and I acknowledge the flippancy was inappropriate in a way, but I just said, well, if we get to the end of the year and no one else dies, it'll be fine. And 2 weeks later, another person passed away. You know, they came out of surgery and something happened afterwards, and it was so quick. And I honestly just began to feel like, you know, I wasn't on solid ground. And as a therapist, indeed as a reader, in any of the helping professions, we have to be conscious of where we are, because, you know, it's if you're not okay, then you don't really have the resources to support people. So I gradually through that year cut back on my practice, and I remained working with the people that I felt I wanted to work with, the kind of the longer term work that I was doing. I wanted
had a deeper relationship with.
Yeah. But the kind of short term pieces of work, I just didn't take on anymore. Right. You know, so I kind of wrapped things up and I didn't replace those kind of slots. And I actually moved. I upped sticks and moved to the coast, which was something I had wanted to do. And I was able to cash in terms of you know, the house that I was previously living in, downsize and spend some time writing. And I think I was just drawn. I no longer live there, but I was drawn to be by the water. Yeah. And I think there was a whole personal healing process that needed to happen. But
well, sure, especially after that much loss too.
Yeah, so it was really important to kind of be processing that, and that's when I had started writing these books about learning to listen to ourselves. I'd had some quite challenging experiences within the community that I was living in. I mean, again, because my views are perhaps for some people a little bit too far left field. Sure. You know, I was absolutely targeted by certain people for having different perspectives, you know, which we would perceive as spiritual perspectives. But, you know, I mean, I sometimes use the analogy, I think, you know, when I was a teenager, if you meditated, you were completely woo-woo. Sure. You know, if you were interested in the environment, you were a tree-hugging hippie. Right. You know, nowadays, every CEO is buying a meditation package because, for their company, for every employee, because it works. Right. But, you know, I come from that generation of people where there's been a lot of stigma attached to holding different perspectives. Absolutely. And I ended up living in a community that had quite rigid views. And it was very, very interesting. And one of my own mentors afterwards said to me, you know, Jenny, if all these things hadn't sort of supposedly gone wrong, would you actually have ever just up sticks and moved and done the thing that you're really supposed to be doing? It's like, you know, you'd have just carried on ticking over, seeing the people you see. Right. And I think it is interesting that, you know, do we actually listen to what we really want to do and have the courage to like the full card,
Right.
to launch ourselves off that cliff? Or do we kind of find ourselves pushed into a corner, or we're in a labyrinth, which I associate with the Hermit card, where we've actually got to stand still and do a little bit of soul searching and some reflection and make some big decisions, you know? And I sometimes think wouldn't it be great if we could listen to ourselves and take action and feel confident about that, rather than waiting for things to almost go wrong? So that pushes us in that direction. But the reading cards in a more public way, which is moving much, much more into a place where I'm now kind of connecting therapy, psychotherapy, counseling, and with the spirit, a more spiritual way of orientating and a spiritual way of finding and gaining information and guidance. That came about because I asked a colleague who is an astrologer. She's also a psychotherapist, and I asked her if she would do an interview with me for my library. And she trained with a world leading body of therapists. And she actually said, I'm really not sure I can do this, because I think that there might be a lot of stigma attached. She said, I don't tell people I'm an astrologer.
Oh, yes. You know, I can kind of relate to that, because when I started so I've got 2 YouTube channels. One that is primarily for my acting, not primarily, it's only for my acting career. So if I have new clips, if I have a trailer, anything like that, it goes up on that. And that's the one that's my name. And then just about, I can't do the math, but in November, I started the tarot channel. And initially it was called New Kid Tarot. And it was a faceless channel. And it was a thing that I just didn't want people to know I could do or was doing at all. And then oddly, as I was doing it, it didn't take many videos for me to start feeling comfortable to add Shon vibes in parentheses. And then I went on Facebook, where my closest confidants are. I'm only Facebook friends with people I actually know. And I outed myself as having psychic abilities and talked about my channel. And then the next thing you know, I took off New Kid Tarot altogether, added my profile picture. And now I'm in a few of the videos, not all, because sometimes I want to do it in my pajamas. But I can completely relate to what your friend felt. And this is in 2022, 2023 that I felt that way.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was after that conversation with her, and I just thought, well, hang on a minute, Jenny, you know, kind of like pot calling kettle black, because you're not out there. You don't tell people you read cards. And that's when I did kind of a bit like you. I kind of launched out there and thought, oh, you know, actually, I'm just going to put some readings out there, because actually this is something I do. And maybe, you know, I need to kind of walk my talk. I need to step up here. And, you know, I am asking somebody to come along and have an interview for my library to talk about how astrology can help. Well, how about I put some readings out there? And that, interestingly enough, was the point at which my kind of YouTube stuff took off, and more people were able to find the library. So even though I kind of built the library and was still adding stuff to it, it was really fascinating that the tarot channel is actually what has enabled people to find.
So it's like a gateway,
resource, you know, so it's like a gateway. So, and if you'd asked me, you know, 10 years ago, if I'd be doing this now, I probably would have laughed at you, you know, but here we are, you know, it's kind of like, but isn't it fascinating? You know, it's really about us going back to that core essence of, do we kind of listen to ourselves? Do we listen to what feels right for us, the stuff that we do, that we love, that we feel strongly connected to? Or are we kind of swayed, that like we don't feel we can be out there doing it because we'll receive criticism? You know, all of these different factors. And, you know, you were asking about, you know, how people feel about finding their calling, and what if they don't know what it is? I kind of think ultimately calling and purpose, I feel like it's something that feels right to you. And if it feels right, and that may change over time. I mean, you know, becoming a counselor, if I go way back to my starting point, that felt right then. And, you know, then later on, suddenly something else has come along that feels right. So sometimes it changes, and one thing will grow upon another. You know, being a mum, you know, felt right. That was a big part of my world for a long, long time, or the main priority in my world. And my kids are now independent and doing their own thing. But, you know, it's like these little strands of our purpose, our calling, I can't help feeling if we listen to ourselves, then we'll know what's right for us. It could be a stay-at-home mum. It could be a going to work mum. It could be being a CEO of a company. It's whatever feels right for you. And I can't help feeling that if you're not able to follow it, sometimes the world gives you a big kick or a little bit of, I mean, I want to say a gentle shove, but it's not always very gentle.
No, it's not.
It's not gentle. Sometimes it's an almighty shove, which says, actually, you go and do this, Absolutely. Step up now.
You just touched on two things that I think are so super important. One of them is a question that I was going to ask, but you touched on it already. And it's the idea of, if someone has children, a lot of times they can think, because for many people, the idea of following one's own path sounds like a luxury as opposed to a right or a necessity. And so if they also have children, I don't happen to. But you do. And so even with having children, you still found that purpose and path unfolded in your life. You allowed for that space. And, I think this is so important for people to have heard you say, so that if it can be helped, they don't just count themselves out or count the possibility out just because they are a parent of some sort. And the second thing that you said that I think ties to this, and is, again, very important that people heard. Jenny, I asked about it as though these two parts of your life were completely separate. But I've always sensed, listening to your content, and you actually kind of touched on this just now, it's a continuation. And that which you do, that which you offer is still there. You're just offering it in a different way. So as opposed to the counseling or the one-on-one psychotherapy, or even, connecting with corporations and CEOs and helping them have wellness for their employees, you offer counseling through your readings. It's just that a lot of people are getting it all at one time. I found that a lot of the topics, or at least your approach to the interpretation of the card, regardless of the topic, is therapeutic in nature, does lend to healing. And as you mentioned, people hear the tarot readings or watch the tarot readings and then connect to your library of resources as a result of that.
I'm inclined to think that everything that happens to us builds some aspect of who we are.
Yeah.
And all my heroes, my own, and I don't mean kind of like Hollywood type heroes.
Right.
I mean real life heroes, real people who I really admire because of who they actually are. Not because they're, they've achieved something in in a particular way, but just the essence of who they are as a human being,
their character.
A character, a real life human being. I mean, obviously that sometimes amounts to amazing achievements, but it's even then, if somebody has amazing achievements and I find them to be really arrogant and rude, well, that's not going to cut it with me, really. I kind of, it's the decency of them, who they are as a real human being, what they've done and how they are with it. It's the whole package. All the people I really admire, all the people, every single one, they've all been through really, really tough times. I don't know anybody who has kind of flown through life smoothly and really, it's like it takes us, it's in a way, it's those kind of dark night of the soul periods. But when we face those real difficult challenges and we step up into them and we step through them and beyond them, those are the things that I think really support our soul's journey. I mean, if you think of a human life as a soul navigating a human life, rather than, a human being having a soul.
Right.
I just think that a human life is like the perfect vessel for the evolution of the soul. It's like if the soul is coming here to move into higher levels of consciousness.
Yes.
And basically our human cock-ups, for want of a better word, and the chaos that we get into,
yes.
whether we create it ourselves or we get entangled in it through other people's stuff, whatever that may be. I just think that that's it. Those are the areas where we learn so much. And every essence of learning, every piece of learning that you personally do, or that I do, or anyone listening does, that piece of learning will have a ripple effect. That piece of learning will mean that next time they have a conversation with someone else, they may approach it differently, they may see it differently, and those things just radiate out into the world. You know, I do feel we are all here with purpose from a spiritual perspective, whatever your take on spirituality. You know, and if there's one thing that, you know, we can all do, it is that we make a commitment to our own personal growth in the knowledge that that will in turn affect others. And, you know, if we are to stop generational patterns from repeating that are causing devastation, not just to one another as human beings, but to our planet and all of life globally, it kind of starts with each of us.
Right.
And it's that level of soul growth. It's that commitment to our own journey. It's that commitment to processing the stuff that we have to deal with on an individual basis every day, the things that go wrong, as well as learning to celebrate the things that go right. You know, that level of soul growth. You know, celebrating your channel, for example, Shon, being you, not just being a faceless channel, being, you know, the mega you that you are. That's amazing. That's you. You know, that in itself is a piece of amazing personal growth that you can say, actually, here I am.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. And doing that means that you know, you will in turn then give other people confidence to do the same, whether that is to step up in a particular situation, however it works. All of the time, if we each are embracing ultimately the growth, whatever that is for us at any time, I feel that's a layer of purpose and a layer of calling that inherently lives within us each. And we may or may not perceive it in that way. But it is my own personal belief that that's that deep layer. If we're going back to that rock face, there's a really deep layer of growth going on within us each. And we have a choice as to whether we step up into that space or not. I mean, you know, you did. You've just
I did. And it's
beautifully, you know, spoken about how you did that. I mean, it's fantastic. You know, you outed yourself and said, I do this, you know, this is me.
And what was interesting to find was not only was there no judgment from anyone, anywhere at all, but there were more people than I could have imagined that are doing or believe in or enjoy as audience members the same thing. And, you know, sometimes the idea of following a path, particularly if we call it our path or one's own path, can feel frightening or isolating because you feel like you're going to be just out there on a limb by yourself. But the reality is, I mean, even just the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you right now, my mind is still going, like that you said yes. I was just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Calm down, Shon. Like you and 𝒂𝒓𝒔𝒂𝒍 and Alyssa, LaRose of Celtic Fairy Tarot, I had backups in case y'all said no. I didn't have to use them. And, you know, so I could not have imagined when I started the channel or when I came up with the idea to have these conversations with you ladies, could not have, or to have conversations with anyone at all around this, could not have imagined that I would get these three amazing people to be able and willing to very generously participate. And so I say all of that to say, you can't even begin to know the support that's out there, the connections you're going to make, the community that might be around you when you step into something that you feel called to do, even if it turns out that you're not called to do it forever. Is it possible, Jenny, for people to have more than one purpose or to have their purpose change? Is that a thing?
I personally think absolutely. I'd go with that, you know, in terms of, again, it's growth, isn't it? You know, I think, you know, you are still the essence of you. None of us necessarily know exactly what is going to happen around the corner.
Right.
You know, we can, to some extent, you know, vision in the things that we want. and we can, you know, try and manifest the stuff that we want, and we can be an active participant in that. But, you know, ultimately, we're not in control of everybody else. When, you know, somebody else can do something that's changes that, and that has an impact on us. And in turn, we then have to think about how we respond. So there's this constant interaction. Again, we are in relationship with all of life. So I think it's completely appropriate that we simply open ourselves to growth and recognize that whatever is your calling or your purpose, whatever feels right now, you know, even if you spoke about, you know, people who've got children, and, you know, when my kids are small, there are things that I wanted to do and it was impossible for me to do some of those things just because actually my children were my priority there. But it kind of didn't stop me. It didn't stop me from still, you know, you could say there are compromises because, you know, I couldn't just allocate vast amounts of space for myself. But I never lost sight of still doing things that felt right, you know, on my own kind of career pathway. And also it felt equally right to be a mum. You know, so for me, but I think it comes back down to being able to try and be as conscious as we can in terms of the choices that we have available to us, but also kind of being open to work with life in the universe. You know, what are we being shown? What doorway is open to you? Do you step up? And when you do, another doorway may then open for you. Yeah. So I feel it's layer upon layer upon layer. I mean, you're quite right. I do bring in often elements of emotional stuff into the readings that I do. There's a whole layer of emotional understanding, you know, that for me is, as long as it's of value to people, I'll continue to put it into the readings. You will bring your own individual take, you know, to readings. And this is about, again, being of service, putting stuff out there and trusting that the right people will find those readings or find those conversations, and that will assist them, that will guide them to the next stepping stone for them. And all of that is about a pathway unfolding, really. So if your pathway suddenly takes a massive turn, a massive change of direction, maybe that's meant to be. I mean, my world did. And ironically enough, I think so much for the better. I mean, now I look at the quality of my life on a daily basis, and there isn't a thing that I do that I don't love. You know,
that is so wonderful,
which is amazing. And I just wish I had another 24 hours for every day, because there's so many things I wish to do and still want to do. And so, you know, to reach that point is fab, actually, you know, but it's been one hell of a journey to get to this point, with a lot of twists and turns in the road and some significant, you know, diversions along the way. But it is, ironically enough, those diversions that build the resilience to get you to the point where maybe you can step up and say, you know, I do have the courage to do this thing now. And if we don't do those other things, if we don't tackle those hurdles and step over those bridges, and I mean, those are the things that give us the kind of inner strength, the resilience. And that comes back down to, as you said, like self-worth, that capacity to step up and say, do you know what, I am kind of worth this. I can actually do this. I don't have to be so fearful of what everyone will think of me. And I don't have to be compliant to somebody else's perspectives. I can walk my own pathway.
That is beautiful. And there is nothing that I can add to that. Like that, I feel like that's the perfect place for me to say thank you again for sharing your time, your wisdom, your personal journey, your very eloquent and yet relatable way of explaining what this could mean in someone's life, the idea of discovering or uncovering and following their life purpose. Jenny, if people want to connect with you, if they want to follow you, if they want access to you, how's the best way for them to do that?
Okay. I mean, in terms of readings, if you're interested in those kinds of things, which they may well be if they're following you,
right.
You know, check into the Moon Magic Weekly Tarot channel. I do post a reading every single Sunday without fail, where we really ask for an immediate message, and also kind of the heads up about what might be coming in the week ahead. And I also do various other readings along the way. I have a Patreon community. I'm actually building a massive course actually at the moment to teach people to read cards. But it's very, very different to, it's not a formal training in like getting a book and just reading. I'm really coming at this from the perspective of neuroscience and a whole psychological and emotional kind of all those layers, the things that have really benefited me in terms of my understanding of the cards. It's about teaching people to listen to themselves and to use the cards in that way, whether it's to benefit themselves or to read for others. So that's a huge project. So it's not going to be launched, but if you are connected to me on Patreon, that is the best place to connect with that layer of stuff, because I do a tutorial on my Patreon site every month. And apart from that, I guess the library. Tune into the library. It's a free resource if you're struggling with any aspect of emotional difficulty. I mean, bereavement, there's a whole section on bereavement. There are meditations to assist with emotional release and also understanding how your emotions can work for you. So there's a wealth of stuff. But yeah, YouTube, the library, Patreon, they're all sites that are, you can tune in with the stuff that I'm doing. And Patreon is probably the most personal community, really, out of those three.
Wonderful. Yeah, guys, I'm actually one of Jenny's patrons on Patreon, and I love her tutorials. So I am going to make sure to link, again, I said this earlier, in the description box of this, whatever platform you're either watching or listening to this podcast, her YouTube channel, her Patreon link, as well as, is there a direct link to your library that I can add as well, Jenny?
Yes, there is. I'll get that over to you. Yeah.
So if you happen not to be into the woo-woo stuff, as we call it, and just want the healing portion of what Jenny has to offer, that will be there as well. Thank you again. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I'm really, really honored that you asked me. And, here you are saying you're so delighted everyone said yes. We're actually very delighted to be. I mean, it feels very, very humbling to be asked. Thank you so, so much.
My heart goes boom. That makes my heart go boom. See you guys later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Aren't my theme songs fun? I found them at Purple Planet Music. You can find music for your projects there too. Just go to purple-planet.com.